Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Caroline Brewer, the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Audubon Naturalist Society and the Chairwoman, the honored and deeply grateful Chairwoman of the 2021 Taking Nature Black Conference. Thank you all for being here with us today. We don't have a lot of time for this last panel, but we want you to think about the moments that we do have and to savor those moments and to be prepared to build on those moments. So we're going to jump right into why we're here. We had initially planned a panel on Black birding, and it was going to talk about the secrets, the joys, the triumphs, the tragedies. And we had to postpone that panel and kind of reset ourselves because of sexual assault allegations that arose a couple of weeks ago, just days before the conference was supposed to open. And that was at the request of the panelist and the moderator. The panelists are Corinna Newsom and Tykee James, and they are deeply involved in the Black birding community, and they wanted the opportunity to process what had happened and what it means. And so today we're talking about Black birding, hope, and healing. And Tykee is our key panelist, but we've also invited Dr. Karen Wilson Ama-Chefu to be on the panel because of her deep insight into trauma in the African American experience, and also because of her wisdom and her spiritual insight. This is an issue that requires healing and some deep thinking and introspection, and a lot of that has been going on throughout this conference, and so it's going to happen today. So we ask you to hang in here with us as we try to cover some fairly heavy issues in a short period of time. But remember that more than time, we have a moment. I'd also like to take a moment to offer a land acknowledgement. We are on the land of the Piscataway Nacotchtank people. And in addition to offering a land acknowledgement, we also want to extend an invitation to anyone from that nation to reach out to the Audubon Naturalist Society, reach out to Taking Nature Black, reach out to Naturally Latinos. We are interested in building deeper, stronger relationships with you. We're interested in your values. We're interested in your insight. And the conferences that we've had have allowed us to build bridges with a wide variety of communities, and we want to continue to do that. So I want to set the ground rules for our discussion today. Our discussion will be talking about, as I said, Black birding, hope, and healing. It will be in light of sexual assault allegations that arose a couple of weeks ago, but we will not discuss those allegations. We don't have moral or legal standing to discuss any details regarding those allegations. So we ask you not to submit questions or comments related to the allegations specifically. We are also here to remember that the words of Dr. Lanham earlier this week, who said that joy is the justice that we give ourselves, and that to be fully human means that you give yourself permission to express joy. And I know that birding has brought so much joy to Tykee. And we want to start by asking him to talk a little bit about his birding bio and the joys that he's experienced.
Thank you so much for grounding us for this moment we find ourselves in. To answer your question briefly, my start to birding started as my first job. So shout out to the Cobbs Creek Community Environmental Education Center in West Philadelphia, where I was not born nor raised there, but shout out to them. And you should know that Cobbs Creek, that environmental center, is only blocks from where the move bombing occurred. about 35 years ago. And I think last year, the city of Philadelphia officially apologized for it. I highly encourage you folks to look up Move Bombing. It's basically um, a big detail in the history of police violence in that neighborhood. And that 35 years, 30 or so years later, when I was there at my first job, that's where I saw my spark bird. That's where I got connected to how the community reflected its relationship with the park. It was because of Cobb's Creek that my start as a birder was also a way for me to build awareness for environmental injustices in my own community. And even today, birding has been a way for me to build coalition, to be a part of bigger movements for environmental progress and racial justice. And birding, something that I love doing in my free time as well. It's not just my job. One thing I want to throw out, my 3 favorite birds. Really, it's 4 favorite birds. Fried chicken, it's delicious. Everyone loves that joke or hates it. That's fine. But in real life, the northern cardinal, I love that bird, especially in the winter when there's not a lot of leaves on the tree and it just looks so brilliant, male or female. I also really appreciate the belted kingfisher. It always remains a bird that just looks totally cool. Also, the belted kingfisher is on my list of, if I were to get a tattoo, it hits the top 3 on that list. I'm not getting a tattoo anytime soon, but if I had such a list, the belted kingfisher would be there as well. And then my number 3 favorite bird is a bird I've only seen once, and that is the green jay. Green jay is a bird I've only seen once in McAllen, Texas, which is about a couple miles from the border of Mexico. And it was actually Dr. Drew Lanham, who pointed it out to me. We were at the Focus on Diversity conference, and it was honestly a spectacular birding moment. You think the day is over, you turn around, you see this really brilliant bird, and then it makes you just think about the moment that you're in.
Fried chicken, huh? I did
Oh.
not.
I mean, what, you don't like fried chicken? That's not one of your favorite birds? It's a good bird.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so tell us a little bit about Black Birders Week and the Black and Latinx Scholarship Foundation that you have been part of co-founding.
Yeah. So Black Birders Week showed that the Black experience goes beyond trauma, right? It encompasses hope and healing, what we're talking about today. It encompasses joy, strength, and style, like my shirt. But Black Birders Week inspired so much, right? It inspired the other pro-Black led weeks. It also inspired Orietta Estrada to reach out to me on Facebook and help and be the co-chair for a building effort to make a nationwide, which currently it does exist. So now we have a nationwide scholarship for Black and Latinx identifying birders in the United States right now. The deadline for it is June 18th, the day before Juneteenth. So, apply at the deadline and celebrate tomorrow, and then we'll figure out who wins the scholarship. We're awarding 2 scholarships up to $5,000. So check out amplifythefuture.org if you want more details on that. Also, Whova, really great app. Use that. You can contact me because I also want to make Black Birders Week a lot local. Last year, I had a lot of fun in my role moderating the panels, a lot of fun learning and networking with folks on Twitter. But I want to be a lot more local with Black Birders Week this year. So, again, hit me up on Whova. I'm trying to see what I can do to build a Black birding audience in DC, something that we can celebrate together, something that we can build together.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And, we all have been inspired by what you and your co-founders have done with Black Birders Week and how it's inspired so many other Black professionals, activists who have been out there working for a long time to support the natural world. And so it seemed that at the height of your success a couple of weeks ago, you suffered a devastating blow. And so can you talk to us a little bit about how you and the Black birding community were affected by those allegations?
I think I'm doing a lot of recommendations. So Pod Save the People did a podcast a couple days ago where they open up, and one of the topics they hit on is linked fate, this idea of linked fate, something that I feel like we already knew we knew. And as they describe in the podcast, it's something that actually now there's a published scientific paper on how we as a people feel connected in triumph and in trauma. And part of the difficulty and part of the challenge of meeting this moment and figuring out what this message was going to be was feeling that sense of disappointment and hurt, but then also thinking about how we can be inspired by courage and how it is important that we know we are not making success in the movement if we are not listening to, supporting, defending, or protecting Black women. We have nothing to achieve as a movement if we cannot protect Black women. And I want to encourage folks to check out feministbirdclub.org. They recently developed a page of resources, recommended resources for supporting survivors and prevention. Because I think it's very important that folks think about, yeah, sexual assault is very bad and obvious, but sexual harassment tolerated in any form should not be accepted in any form. And to the strong extent, I want to reiterate, we are not moving forward in a movement if we are not protecting Black women.
Thank you, Tykee. I think that's such an important statement, given the times that we're in, when people are finally starting to pay attention to the contributions of Black women throughout American society, even in the civil rights movement. Their contributions were not acknowledged and have not been acknowledged. So, I think having a lens on the role and the vulnerabilities and the histories and experiences of Black women is an important way to move forward with the whole experience of advocating for safe outdoor spaces. Another part of that occurred to me when I was thinking about the wounds that the Black birding community was suffering, the Black community in general. It hurts deeply to see people hurting one another on any level. And I want Dr. Karen to talk to us about the history of overcoming, the history of healing, the history of hope that we've had to do, because we had to recognize that whatever the fight is, it isn't a fight against an individual person. It's a fight against a policy. It's a fight against a practice. It's a fight against principalities. It's a fight sometimes against laws and codes and walls of silence. You know, it's a fight against ideas and thoughts that are poisonous, and treacherous, and dehumanizing. So Dr. Karen, could you pick up on that for us?
Hello, everyone. I'm so blessed and grateful to be here with you. I want to say really quickly, I'm very young in my understanding of birding. And I was thinking, just as Tykee was talking, where mine starts. And a very important part of it started in Calabar. I lived in southeastern Nigeria for about 5 years. And I remember that's not only where my birding awareness begins, it's where call and response begins. I would open my eyes before the sun came up and hear a bird close to me. I've never seen these birds. I have no idea what they look like, but I would hear a bird close to me call, and another one, maybe a mile away, maybe, I don't know how far away, respond. And that is where we grow our own call and response. So what's the call? and what's the response. Sometimes the call is really wonderful and joyous and fabulous. And so our response is wonderful and joyous and fabulous, but sometimes the call is not so wonderful, but it is still a call in need. So I'm going to suggest something because we can't always tell what the call is going to be. I'm going to suggest that as we understand ourselves, we do it in stillness. There is a need for stillness at the core of ourselves, at the very center. If we lose that sense of stillness, we cannot respond. We cannot consider action. Stillness makes it possible for us to see, assess, and make decisions and act. But if we allow ourselves to be shaken and begin to react with that sense of shaken or stirred, if we allow ourselves to be disturbed, we have to be like a tree by the river. Then we don't know where to turn or how. Our ancestors must have understood this, because if they'd allowed themselves to be shaken, we would not be here. There's a great expectation in the world. People look at Black people and say, how in the world could you keep going? You know, because their responses have not always been so reasonable. And we've had to handle our responses to their lack of ability to respond.
I think that's a beautiful thought for us to center ourselves around, because this conference has been action-packed. Lots of thoughts, lots of ideas, lots of opportunities for us to connect with one another. But we want those connections and the relationships that we build to be authentic. And sometimes that requires that we take a moment to reflect on who it is we want to bring to this relationship. And I would love to hear what you think, Tykee, about taking some time to be still and reflect, and to not be shaken so that you fall off your perch, let's say.
Good use of the word perch. I am a birder. I am much a birder.
There you go.
Very much, in that inspirational guide that you laid out so perfectly, I think it is the call and response. Like, what are we learning from each other when things happen? When the community needs to talk to itself about itself, how are we responding? Because, a house divided cannot stand. A movement cannot have a momentum if we are not protecting Black women. And I think that this is a critical time, especially in the birding community. But I think this has been a mark of how we progress as humanity in how do we build together when we know it is hard sometimes. And how do we respond when that call is a traumatic call? And I think that I find a
Exactly.
lot of joy in creating things, and I find a lot of joy in creating things with others. And this is definitely one of those moments. This address here that we are sharing is something that we created after a traumatic call. And I just hope that folks take this moment as a call to action, because we cannot just read ourselves out of racism. We cannot just read ourselves out of misogyny. We have to experience it. And there might be a deep guilt. There might be a profound pointing at oneself. And you should embrace that, because there are ways that I am part of the problem. And I think that's something that everyone needs to say.
Well said. Thank you. We have just about 10 minutes and we do want to get in a couple of questions, but I wanted to ask you, Dr. Karen, quickly, if you want to expand on the idea of protection. You mentioned this in our conversation beforehand about when we are moving forward as a community, who are we protecting? Who needs protecting in addition to Black women?
You know, this human thing is not an easy deal. And those who have to point to themselves, as we often do, we all need protection. As a Black woman, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to hear that somebody's thinking about protecting me. Okay, I'm down with that. We've also had to understand that we need to be guided back to what is good, to see ourselves. We need to protect what we understand of ourselves and each other. There are too many who will criminalize immediately just for walking down the street, just for sitting in a Starbucks and chatting. So we need to be still inside of ourselves, not be shaken, see what we really see and speak to that and move toward the healing thing. Because if we're shaken off the perch and we forget that there are a number of things that need to go on at the same time, then we're going to miss our shot, as it were. Wrong. We'll miss our moment. And we always have to go back and take care of the thing we miss. So let's try to be still so that we can pay attention to all of the pieces, so that the mosaic that comes out will be whole. So that Black women will feel whole, Black men will feel whole, and that we will have a sense of balance and compassion for each other and ourselves. That's the hardest one, the compassion for yourself, to me. So I just commend the dialogue, the multilogue, and that we are discovering what it means to be fully human. We are very special. What it means to be fully human, it means that we can be still. It means that we can build. And that we don't have room to throw out the baby in the bathwater. I don't want the bathwater, but I certainly like the baby.
All right. I think birds have a little something to do with baths too, right?
I was thinking of like a bird metaphor with that. Yeah, throw out the bird with the bathtub, or the what do birds use?
The bath.
The bird with the bird bath. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, we want to get a couple questions in, and I want to encourage people to include more questions in our chat. Even if we don't get to answer them in this forum, we want to make sure that Tykee gets them and Karen and I get them, and we can come back to them.
Absolutely.
So he'd asked basically, what type of action has Congress taken to save our birds and their habitats? He referenced Vermont and California having state level migratory bird protections to help fill the gap left by the Trump administration. Do you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of ways that we can advance bird conservation and mitigate the effects of climate. There are ways that we can advance bird conservation and have jobs. I think that there's a plethora of bills. One that comes to mind when we're talking about migratory birds, is the Migratory Bird Protection Act. I don't think it has been reintroduced yet, but it is an attempt to fill in those legal gaps to make sure the term incidental take isn't an optional enforcement when it comes down to measuring how we develop energy or jobs or industry, but then also how do we defend these important habitat indicators? If we're hurting wildlife, we're hurting our ability to understand nature. So the Migratory Bird Protection Act, I'd be on the lookout for that. Also, wildlife corridors. I think that there's an opportunity to look at these types of green network building opportunities, not just for the goodness of wildlife, but for the connectivity of nature and for the connectivity of natural climate solutions of some sort. So I'd be on the lookout also for infrastructure packages that include investments in green infrastructure, because the way we're going to build in the future has to be more green than gray.
Amen. All right. All right. Sophia says birding is often done in groups, but many traditional birding groups have exclusive reputations. Do you know of any current models that are family friendly?
I mean, back in the day, pre-COVID, in the before times, I would say the DC Audubon Society is a very inclusive birding opportunity in my experience, because we would have an RSVP for 30 people, but then 60 people would show up because so many folks would get so much out of, what happens in a bird walk. So many different things can happen. It would be hard for me to say now that we're in the COVID times. I would definitely reiterate my recommendation to look at the Feminist Bird Club, because they are one of the groups that do not rely on a legacy of a name to tell you what they are. Because we know, and we've, and I encourage folks to read Dr. J. Drew Lanham's article about the National Audubon Society and the name, because accountability has to be a part of your legacy. And if it's not, you sit on a history of contradictions. So I, if anything, would look at the newer birding groups today and find how they are enabling accountability as a day one, a mission, driven organization. I would look at that more than I would look at, your grandfather's favorite bird club.
Okay, so a couple questions to get you out on. One you can answer verbally, but the other one, please put in the chat. And that one is, people want to know more about Black Birder Week. So share the details.
Hit me up on Hoover. Yeah, especially if you want to do stuff in DC, please. I'm trying to build a network. I have a monthly gathering that I started with a couple Black Birder friends, and we just literally just talk on a Zoom call for about an hour about whatever's going on. So I would love to include more people in that. You Black, you bird, even if you don't black that, or even if you're not, no, even if you don't bird that much, we would love to include you, because maybe this is just a community to encourage you a little more.
Okay. So Ian asks, is the word birding part of the problem? In my opinion, it conjures up an image of young, energetic people charging about in search of birds, often to remote areas that minority groups might not be able or willing to visit. I think it excludes people who just like to watch birds out of their window or in their local park. I think bird watching is a more inclusive term. This is one you're going to hit out of the park, Tykee, because this is your specialty, right?
Yes, I would say I like the term birding personally, because there's just so many things you can do with it. And in my opinion, yes, I think that is a valid image that can be conjured up. But in my opinion, birding can just be with the ears. It can be with the eyes. It can just be remembering the birds you saw in a park the other day and you make a list. It could be you opening up a field guide while your friend is on the phone. I was actually talking to a friend the other day. She was looking at this duck in a pond in Ohio. I wasn't there, but I picked up a field guide and I felt like I was birding. So I would say birding is the catch-all term for doing something that involves those birds. Even when I'm frying them, it counts. No, I don't know if that counts as birding. I don't know if that counts.
It's my
The
understanding.
bird, the chicken fried, Joe. No.
No, not the.
Well, we have to wrap up. It's 1:50, but Tykee, you told me that you are really interested in helping people understand how to bird in their neighborhoods, how to bird in local parks. So I think part of what's happening with the new generation is that birding will take on a different image because people are doing it differently.
Right, right.
Not all about driving, an hour away to see
No.
something. We know that beautiful and exotic species, so-called exotic, exist, right down the street.
We'll call them neotropical, right? DC gets a lot of great birds. So I just hope that this is also a way people can connect to the environment that has always been around them.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for being with us. Please keep those questions coming. Tykee wants to build this community, and he's part of a nationwide effort to help. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for this moment.
Hang on for our closing session coming up in about 2 minutes.
See you then.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yay.
Yay. Wow.